Hello everyone, Alien Volt here, and I am playing World of Warcraft, Warlords of Draenor. And this is Arcane Sanctum, part of the High Maul raid instance. It's actually the second of 3 parts of High Maul. The instance features elementals, groans, ogres, and a few orcs for trash. Now the only difference between the fight coming up with Tectus, right after we clear this group of mobs, from looking for raid and higher raids, is that there will not be any gift of earth being cast in this, which usually requires the tank to intercept the gifts from the boss. That's about it. Other than that, Tectus looks very much like this group of mobs. He is a very large, colossal, earthen fury elemental, and here he is. And basically he multiplies himself during the fight, at which time you kill the ad. And other than that, it's pretty straightforward. You do want to try to avoid the AoE on the ground and these large rocks that he summons up here. As with any of these fights, if you don't pay attention to the AoE on the ground, it can add up really quick as melee and end up taking you out. In this stage coming up, we're about ready to get some ads here. They're fairly easy enough to take out, as well as his division here. Now the division obviously doesn't have very much health, so he's pretty quick to take out, and then you can focus right back on Tectus. I like switching back and forth between the 2 targets and trying to keep my dots up on Tectus, as well as his split shard here of himself. I've actually found this newer set of raids much easier than in the past. And not that Mist of Pandaria was really difficult, but it definitely seemed a little more difficult than this raid has so far. I don't know what the next set's going to look like. I'll find out soon enough, but so far this one has not been overwhelmingly difficult at all. There really hasn't been very many wipes that I've experienced, and I've ran through this instance now probably around 3 times. I think out of those 3 times, I've maybe experienced 3 wipes. Which is nothing when you look at, even in Mist of Pandaria, I remember looking for raid groups that wiped, 3 or 4 times on one boss. Let alone 3 or 4 times in like 3 different runs. Oh, he's down. Alright, and all I got is another buff stone. And I'm actually saving these, I'm not using them yet. I'm actually saving them for when I do the normal raids, so that way I can buff my stats up. I just really don't think they're necessary in looking for raid. In fact, this raid has been so easy so far, I haven't even bothered with any type of pots or flask or anything. Just basic buffs. My gear is actually pretty poor. I've got a little bit of heroic dungeons, some PvP gear, and some raid gear that I've got out of here. Other than that, I don't really have any crafted gear. Nothing that's buffed up beyond this instance at all. My highest pieces of gear are rated at 640, which is what actually drops in this instance. And I've found out through inspecting a lot of these people in here, most of them have 640 plus gear. So they've already either got the crafted gear that's around 670, or the actual raid gear, which is anywhere between like 655 to 685. So I'm a little under geared compared to a lot of these people in here, but not bad. Still doing alright. Most of the time I can see myself on the DPS charts, which is a good indication. But it really depends on what I'm doing, whether or not we're pulling trash, large groups of mobs, or focusing on one single target, which is what I tend to do best. My AoE seems to be a little slow. I don't know. I might need to add more multi-strike and haste. Mastery is no longer the dominant stat for Feral Druids. So now we're supposed to stack everything with multi-strike and crit. Although I'm still waiting for some figures to come out with the higher end gear to see what the best stats are actually going to end up being. It's a bird, it's a plane. No, it's a flying druid. In cat form. They have a hell of a knockback, which is not a good thing considering how many of them are actually in this room. Easily bite off more than your raid can chew. The casters can be pretty irritating, but most of the time you can interrupt their spells. So if you have enough people actually on them, you can keep them from doing too much damage, but they're still annoying. Alright, here we have the twin Ogren. They're basically groans. Look like ogres on steroids. Here we go. Now the toughest thing about this fight is this fire right here. It really gets annoying. It moves all over the room, so it's really hard to predict where it's actually going to travel to. So you end up getting some dots on you, and it ticks away at a pretty high rate. And the more times you get hit by it, the higher the dot ticks. And although there might be a better way to do this, and I'm sure there probably is for those who work at this as a group every week, can figure out a pretty good method. But for looking for raid, and especially being, I think this is my third time in here for this, it's been pretty much the same every time. We lose a lot of people to the fire, and you know, you just try to avoid it. You try to stay out of it. The fight is pretty basic. They share health, so you only have to take one down. They have different abilities. This guy does the flames. The other guy has like a whirlwind ability and like a shield type of charge. Now the differences between looking for raid and normal and heroic modes are there's a fear that's induced in the normal and heroic modes that isn't in the looking for raid. And there's also a life-threatening injured ability from the shield charge. And then finally there's an interrupting shout ability that in looking for raid only locks spells for a second versus 6 seconds in normal and heroic. So it's definitely going to be an easier fight on looking for raid, but it's a good warm-up to get into the normal raids and heroic raids later on. Now in the past, looking for raid wasn't much different as far as loot went. You had a different tier as far as the value of the loot, so the item level was definitely lower, but the item themselves resembled each other. And that was a complaint by some people. Enough so that Blizzard has taken steps to eliminate that, so now looking for raid no longer has set pieces available to get. So if you want tier sets, you actually have to do the normal, heroic, or mythic levels of the raid. High Maul itself doesn't have any set pieces, no tier pieces rather, but Blackrock Foundry will have for normal and above raids. Which is actually somewhat disappointing for me, because these days I'm a casual player and I normally don't do the normal raids or above unless I rarely go in. Now, back in Wrath of the Lich King, you know, the Burning Crusade before that, and Vanilla WoW before that, I was pretty much a hardcore raider. I raided all the time. I did a little bit in Cataclysm, but more as a fill-in. Because of my schedule, I just didn't have the time to dedicate to raids every week. And Mists of Pandaria, nothing but looking for raids. And that's all I really planned on doing for this expansion as well. However, now with the changes, I may actually look for a guild that I can go in and raid like 1 day a week and still manage to get my set pieces, so I can, you know, have a look or the bonuses of the set pieces. Depending on how the gear looks. Sometimes it's pretty horrible. Thank God for transmog. Which is what I've ended up doing ever since they implemented it in the game, pretty much. There was a set in Mists of Pandaria that I liked for my raid gear, which I think was the first or second tier I think we got. And basically it gave my druid like a bear mask. And the rest of the set, you know, the coloring and everything wasn't too bad, but I really liked the mask, so I went ahead and I wore the whole set. And then for PvP, I transmogged a different set completely. And if you can tell by looking at my bags, I am a loot hoarder. My bank is completely full, as well as my void storage, which you have to actually pay, like I think it's 10 or 20 gold every time you want to store something. But I just have that thing completely stuffed with set pieces that of gear that I probably won't even ever transmog to use. I just want to keep it in case it ends up going with something else that I have or find along the way later on, so I can mix and match things and put them together and have something really cool whenever I want. Now what I really wish they'd do is something more like Rift, where you just have like an extra tab that you can actually put gear into and then click on it to basically check it to have that look. And you can dye the gear any color you want. Although you do have to pay for the dye, you only have to dye the gear once. And then you can have that in there, you know, forever if that's what you want. And any piece of gear you put on thereafter will always, you know, your character is always going to show up with the image that you've selected, rather than transmogging the gear you have every time you get a new piece of gear, which can get pretty irritating, especially if you keep upgrading your gear really quick. And although it's not super expensive if you're playing and doing dailies all the time, but if you're a casual player like me, it can start to add up, especially when you factor in the cost of the garrison upgrades. The garrison has broken me. I didn't have much money to begin with, but now I have none. And my biggest problem is I have like 13 characters, so I have to fund and support and level 13 characters from 90 to 100. And that's 13 garrisons I'm building. It all adds up. Every bit of money that I end up getting in this game ends up going right back out. Well, I was really hoping for the chest on that boss, but of course I didn't get it. So that's like 5 bosses now, including the first part of High Maul, that I have received nothing. Fantastic. Okay, we've made it to the final room of the Arcane Sanctum, where we will eventually fight Korag once we clear the trash. And there is plenty of them. I don't know if there's an actual priority on these guys. I would think the casters, but they tend to move around so much. I'm just trying to do a lot of AoE, which I don't really do a lot of anymore. And at this point, I really don't know if it's a gear issue or more of a design change that they've done for Feral Druids. Even in the very early stages, I just wasn't really putting out a lot of AoE damage. And I had pretty decent gear coming into this expansion. Now, an overall factor of my DPS may be my actual spec, but not really affecting my AoE damage. It'd be more single target DPS, and that's the choice of my spec to go into the Shirvala form, which you see here, which is kind of like half cat, half humanoid type form, which is pretty nice. It allows me to cast some basic heals while in form without shape-shifting. However, it is at a loss of DPS. Alright, time to pull Korag. This fight will put a little bit of strain on the healers and casters in general, with the Expel Magic and Suppression Field being cast. While melee, as usual, has to look for any type of AoE on the ground, which can be hard with all the different player AoEs piling up. Another ability in this fight is Overflowing Energy, which basically does damage, and looking for raid, 5 people can stack on this and absorb the damage to share the damage. It's actually dished out. Whereas in regular raid up to mythic raid, you're going to have one player do that. Other than that, this fight really isn't very difficult. You just kill the ads. I really haven't seen any wipes on this boss yet. That doesn't mean that I won't ever experience any, but I just haven't had one yet. I'm really hoping for harder content when they open up Blackrock Foundry for looking for raid. I just don't know if that's actually going to be the case or not. It may end up being as easy as this instance, which will be somewhat disappointing. And although I don't really want to spend, 4 hours in a looking for raid group, going through people that keep dropping the group because we keep wiping, at the same time I would like a little bit of a challenge that actually makes us work for it. And of course, when he spawns his ads, he is immune to damage. So the faster the raid can get these ads down, the better. This damage shield is done, and since my AoE is not super great, I'm going to go ahead and switch back to the boss here and get some dots put on him. Now as a DPS, I definitely feel this is an easier fight than the Twin Ogrun, which I think is one of the hardest fights in this instance, period. And that's mainly just because the fire does so much damage, and if you get hit with it a few times, the debuff that it gives you just causes the healers to have a nightmare trying to keep up. Alright, ads are down. Get back on the boss here. If we can get him down. Really looking forward to getting all my gear though, so my gear score is actually high enough I can join a regular raid group and try it out. See how it goes. Alright, last phase of ads here. We get these down and he's done. You know what's funny is, as easy as this looking for raid is right now, when people are like fully geared next year, and whatever raid happens to be the top raid at the time, this instance is going to be so quick. Not that it's really long now. I mean, you can plan on probably anywhere between 25 to 45 minutes depending on how fast your group moves through. And that's for a full clear including all trash. In fact, it wouldn't surprise me to see groups clear all 3 wings of the instance in less than 45 minutes. I can't believe we got more ads. I thought we were going to get him for sure. And he's down. Another buff stone, and I got a necklace. That'll be an upgrade. Nice. Alright guys, well I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.